November 7th, 1944, Morville-les-Vicq, France. The morning air hung thick with fog as Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann peered through his field glasses from a concealed position in the village. "These Negro tankers fight with precision we did not expect," he scribbled in his combat journal. "Their coordination exceeds many German units I have witnessed. Either our intelligence has failed us completely, or we have been deliberately misled about the capabilities of these soldiers." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Through the grey dawn, Hartmann had just witnessed something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi indoctrination. Black American tankers maneuvering Sherman tanks with tactical sophistication that matched veteran Wehrmacht panzer crews. An armoured thrust that broke through German defensive positions designed to hold for days. In Germany, party leadership had assured the Wehrmacht that African soldiers were primitives, incapable of modern warfare, unable to operate complex machinery. Yet here, in what Nazi ideology had described as America's weakest racial element, black soldiers commanded 30-ton steel machines with deadly efficiency. 712 men of the 761st Tank Battalion had just entered combat for the first time. Not in a supporting role, not in a limited capacity, but as the spearhead of Patton's Third Army offensive into northeastern France, the entire German defensive line had prepared to face what they believed would be an easy victory against inferior troops. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound challenge to Nazi racial theory since the war began. A systematic demolition of white supremacist ideology through the sheer demonstration of black military excellence. The mathematics of ideological collapse were being written not in propaganda leaflets, but in combat statistics that would soon shatter every assumption Wehrmacht soldiers carried about race, capability, and the nature of military prowess. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The journey to this moment had begun on April 1st, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated as part of an experiment the United States Army did not fully believe in. American military doctrine in 1942 held that black soldiers were unsuitable for combat roles. Decades of institutional racism had relegated African Americans to labor battalions, mess duties, and service positions. The creation of the 761st represented a grudging concession to political pressure from black newspapers and civil rights organizations, not a genuine commitment to integrated warfare. Among the men who reported to Camp Claiborne was 23-year-old Ruben Rivers, born in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and raised in Hotulka. Half Cherokee, half black, Rivers had worked on his family farm and then for the railway before his draft notice arrived in January 1942. His service record would note an unusual combination of mechanical aptitude and natural leadership ability. Also arriving was Leonard Smith from New York, William McBurney from Pennsylvania, and Preston McNeil from Texas. These men represented every corner of black America, brought together by war and by a system that segregated them even as it demanded their service. The battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, was white, one of the few white officers who genuinely believed in his men's capabilities. Bates understood something that most of the army hierarchy refused to accept. Given proper training and equipment, black soldiers would prove equal to any troops in the world. His challenge was overcoming not enemy forces, but his own military's prejudices. The training regime Bates implemented was deliberately brutal. The 761st trained harder and longer than equivalent white units. They had to. Every mistake would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. Every failure would confirm the prejudices of skeptical superior officers. The pressure was immense, but it forged bonds stronger than steel. The men learned to operate the M5 Stuart light tank at Camp Claiborne. The Stuart mounted a 37mm gun and 3 .30-caliber machine guns. It was fast, reaching 36 miles per hour, but lightly armoured and vulnerable. The tankers practiced manoeuvres in the Louisiana heat, learning to coordinate movement, communication, and fire control. They learned gunnery, how to identify targets at range and engage them accurately while moving. They learned maintenance, how to repair tracks, replace road wheels, service engines under field conditions. They learned radio procedure, the precise language that would coordinate tanks across a battlefield. The training was exhausting. Tank interiors in Louisiana summer reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Crews practiced until coordination became instinct. Driver, gunner, loader, and commander had to function as a single organism. A gunner's aim had to be precise despite the vehicle's movement. A loader had to feed shells into the gun without pause. A driver had to maneuver through terrain while monitoring engine performance and fuel consumption. They excelled. By August 1942, when the battalion moved to Camp Livingston for large-scale maneuvers, their proficiency ratings matched those of veteran white armoured units. Observers noted their discipline, their mechanical skill, their tactical awareness. In mock battles against other units, they performed admirably. Their maintenance records were exemplary. Their gunnery scores were high. By every objective measure, they were ready for combat. But excellence brought no deployment orders. While white tank battalions shipped to North Africa, Italy, and eventually France, the 761st remained stateside. The pattern became clear. The army was willing to train black tankers, but unwilling to commit them to combat. The official reasons varied. Some officers claimed there were not enough black support personnel to sustain a black tank battalion in combat. Others argued that white infantry would not accept black tank support. Still others simply stated that this was an experiment that needed more observation before field deployment. The real reason was simpler. The army did not believe black soldiers could fight effectively. This belief, rooted in racial prejudice rather than evidence, kept the 761st in training while the war raged overseas. Month after month, the 761st trained. In April 1943, they participated in Third Army maneuvers at Camp Polk. These were large-scale exercises involving thousands of troops, simulating combat conditions across hundreds of square miles of terrain. Again, they performed admirably. Again, they received no orders. The frustration was corrosive. These were men who had volunteered or been drafted to fight fascism, confined to an endless training cycle because of the colour of their skin. The irony was not lost on them. They were preparing to fight Nazi racial ideology while experiencing American racial prejudice. The bitter paradox deepened during their time at Fort Hood, Texas. Beginning in September 1943, the 761st was upgraded to M4 Sherman medium tanks. The Sherman mounted a 75mm main gun, later upgraded to 76mm. It featured improved armour, better crew protection, and the firepower to engage German armour effectively. The tank weighed approximately 30 tons and required a 5-man crew. The Sherman was the workhorse of American armoured forces, produced in greater numbers than any other American tank during the war. The men threw themselves into mastering the new equipment. The Sherman was more complex than the Stuart, larger, heavier, more powerful. It demanded different handling. Crews learned to manage its wider turning radius, its greater fuel consumption, its more sophisticated fire control systems. They practiced firing the main gun, coordinating with infantry, executing complex tactical maneuvers. They became proficient quickly. Their enthusiasm for finally receiving combat-capable equipment was evident in every training report. But Fort Hood sat in the heart of Jim Crow, Texas. The contradiction between their mission and their treatment became unbearable. They were training to fight for freedom and democracy while experiencing neither. Off-duty, the black soldiers faced segregated facilities everywhere. Separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate waiting rooms. Restaurants refused to serve them. Businesses turned them away. Local police harassed them. White civilians treated them with contempt. On base, conditions were only marginally better. Black soldiers and white soldiers trained separately, ate separately, slept in separate barracks. Even the post-exchange and movie theatre were segregated. Black soldiers who had earned the right to wear the uniform of the United States Army were denied basic dignity because of their skin color. One incident crystallized the contradiction. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, an exceptional athlete who would later break baseball's color barrier, refused to move to the back of a bus on the Fort Hood base in July 1944. His battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bates, supported him, but senior officers intervened, transferred Robinson to another unit, and court-martialed him. Robinson was eventually acquitted, but too late to deploy with the Tange, 761st. The message was clear: black soldiers, no matter how capable, would be treated as second-class citizens. The deployment order finally came in June 1944. After 2.5 years of training, the 761st Tank Battalion was alerted for overseas movement. The men could hardly believe it. The war in Europe had been raging for nearly 5 years. D-Day had occurred on June 6th. Allied forces were establishing themselves in France. The need for armoured units was desperate. Finally, the 761st would get their chance to prove what they had been insisting all along. They were ready. On August 27, 1944, they boarded the troopship Esperance Bay in New York Harbor. 712 men, along with their personal equipment, prepared for the voyage across the Atlantic. They could not bring their tanks. Those would be issued in England. But they brought everything else: weapons, tools, spare parts, personal gear. The organized chaos of embarkation filled the docks as units loaded supplies and equipment. The Esperance Bay was a British vessel, one of hundreds of ships moving men and material across the Atlantic to feed the war in Europe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The accommodations were cramped. Soldiers slept in bunks stacked 4 high in holds that had been converted to troop quarters. Meals were served in shifts. Space was at a premium. But the men's spirits were high. After years of waiting, they were finally going to war. The 10-day voyage to England gave them time to process what lay ahead. They were about to become the first black armoured unit to see combat in the European theatre. Other black units had fought before them. The 92nd Infantry Division had seen combat in Italy. Separate black artillery battalions had supported white infantry divisions. But no black tank battalion had yet entered combat in Europe. The 761st would be first. The weight of representation bore heavily on their shoulders. Every action would be scrutinized. Every mistake would be magnified. Success would challenge prevailing assumptions about race. Failure would confirm them. Upon arrival in England, the 761st received the latest version of the Sherman tank, the M4A3, with the upgraded 76mm gun. This was a significant improvement over the 75mm gun they had trained with in Texas. The 76mm had greater armor penetration capability, allowing it to engage German Panthers and Tigers more effectively. The longer gun barrel and improved ammunition gave American tankers a better chance against the heavier German armor they would face in combat. The M4A3 model also featured a more powerful engine, the Ford GAA V8, producing 450 horsepower. This engine gave the Sherman better acceleration and hill-climbing ability than earlier models. The improved power plant made the 30-ton tank more responsive in combat, allowing it to maneuver quickly and take advantage of terrain. These improvements mattered. In tank combat, speed and firepower often meant the difference between survival and death. They trained briefly on British soil, familiarizing themselves with the upgraded vehicles, conducting gunnery practice, running tactical exercises. The training was compressed, intense. They had only weeks to master the new equipment before shipping to France. British training areas in southern England echoed with the sound of tank engines and gunfire as American units prepared for combat. The 761st trained alongside white American units and British armoured formations. Some white American soldiers expressed surprise at seeing black tankers. Some British soldiers, less affected by American racial attitudes, treated them simply as fellow soldiers. Then they shipped to France. The English Channel crossing was rough. Tank crews, many of whom had never been to sea before their Atlantic voyage, struggled with seasickness as landing craft pitched and rolled in Channel waters. But they made it. On October 10th, 1944, they came ashore at Omaha Beach, 4 months after D-Day. The D-Day beachhead was secure, but the remnants of battle still littered the sand. Destroyed equipment, shattered fortifications, and the ghostly atmosphere of ground paid for in blood. The 761st moved quickly inland, travelling by rail and road toward the front lines. On October 28, 1944, they reached their assembly area near the French-German border. General George Patton, commander of 3rd Army, had specifically requested the 761st for his push toward the Siegfried Line. Patton was known for his aggressive armoured warfare tactics and his controversial personality. He was also known for his complicated views on race. He had served with Buffalo Soldiers early in his career and respected their fighting ability. Yet he also harboured the prejudices common to his generation and social class. Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you were not good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I do not care what colour you are as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Do not let them down, and damn you, do not let me down. The speech was vintage Patton, mixing profanity, motivation, and acknowledgement of the racial dynamics at play. The men of the 761st understood the subtext. They were on trial. Their performance would be judged not just as soldiers, but as representatives of their entire race. The pressure was immense, but they had trained for this moment for 30 months. On November 7th, 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion entered combat. Their first objective was the German-held town of Morville-les-Vicq in northeastern France. The town sat astride a key road junction that the Germans had fortified. Previous American attacks had failed to dislodge the defenders. The 761st was attached to the 26th Infantry Division and ordered to break the stalemate. Captain John Long of B Company led the assault. Long was a no-nonsense officer from Detroit who had earned his men's respect through competence and courage. Behind him, Sergeant Roy King commanded the lead Sherman tank. The attack began at dawn. As King's tank entered Morville-les-Vicq, a German soldier armed with a Panzerfaust, an anti-tank rocket launcher, fired from a building. The panzer-shaped charge struck the Sherman's flank, disabling the tank and wounding 2 crew members. The situation was critical. The lead tank was immobilized, blocking the narrow street. German defenders were converging on the position. King and his crew dragged the wounded men to cover behind the tank. Then, using small arms and the tank's remaining operational weapons, they killed the Panzerfaust gunner and the crew of a nearby German anti-tank gun. The rest of B Company pushed into the town. Staff Sergeant Ruben encountered a German roadblock, a felled tree reinforced with mines blocking the advance. German mortar and small arms fire pinned down the accompanying infantry. The entire attack threatened to bog down. Without hesitation, Rivers dismounted from his tank. Under direct fire, he attached a tow cable to the roadblock and climbed back into his Sherman. His tank dragged the obstacle clear, allowing the column to advance and the infantry to break free from their exposed position. For this action, Rivers would later receive the Silver Star. By the end of the day, November 7th, the 761st had captured Morville-les-Vicq. The Germans had defended stubbornly, but the Black Panthers, as the battalion had nicknamed themselves after their unit insignia, had prevailed. The cost was significant. Sergeant Roy King died of his wounds, other casualties mounted. But the 761st had proven they could fight. More importantly, they had proven they could win. German prisoners taken at Morville-les-Vicq revealed something unexpected: confusion. Wehrmacht officers had been told that black American soldiers were poorly trained, poorly led, and would break under pressure. Instead, they had encountered a well-coordinated armored infantry team that maneuvered with precision and fought with determination. One captured German officer, according to after-action reports, acknowledged the tactical competence displayed, comparing the American tank crews' conduct to that of experienced Soviet units he had faced on the Eastern Front. The 761st pushed forward. On November 8th, they fought at Vic-sur-Seille. On November 9th, they assaulted Château Salins after a 4-hour battle. On November 10th, they captured Dieuze. Each engagement reinforced the same pattern. The Black Panthers fought effectively, adapted to changing battlefield conditions, and achieved their objectives. At Vic-sur-Seille, they encountered German defensive positions that had repelled previous attacks. The town sat on elevated ground, giving defenders clear fields of fire. German anti-tank guns covered the approach roads. Machine gun positions dominated key intersections. The 761st coordinated with infantry, using smoke to obscure German observation, suppressing defensive positions with tank fire while infantry advanced under cover. They took the town with minimal casualties through superior tactics and coordination. At Château Salins, they faced a more determined defense. German troops had fortified stone buildings, creating strongpoints that dominated the town center. Tank main guns proved effective against these positions, reducing them methodically while infantry cleared surrounding structures. The 4-hour battle demonstrated the battalion's growing combat effectiveness. They were learning, adapting, improving with each engagement. The men themselves were surprised by how well they performed under fire. Years of training had prepared them technically, but combat revealed character. Fear was universal, but they functioned despite it. The sounds of battle, the smell of cordite, the sight of casualties, all the sensory overload of combat became manageable through training and leadership. Tank commanders made decisions calmly under fire. Crews executed orders despite danger. The battalion functioned as it had been designed to function. Sergeant Warren Crécy became legendary for his courage. When his Sherman was knocked out by a German anti-tank gun, Crécy jumped out, commandeered a machine gun on a nearby half-track, and used it to eliminate the enemy crew. Then he climbed onto another tank and continued fighting. His actions earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. Crécy's combat record over the entire campaign was extraordinary. He fought at the front continuously, demonstrating tactical skill and personal courage that earned respect from everyone who witnessed it. Tank commanders who served with him recalled his calm under fire, his ability to make quick tactical decisions, his willingness to expose himself to danger to accomplish the mission. These qualities, repeated across the battalion by dozens of men, defined the unit's character. The 761st was not just one or two exceptional individuals. It was an entire battalion of trained, motivated, capable soldiers who performed their duties under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Every tank crew functioned effectively. Every platoon executed orders professionally. The battalion as a whole achieved its objectives repeatedly against determined opposition. This collective excellence made the unit's achievement significant. It proved that black soldiers in general, not just a few exceptional individuals, could perform as well as any troops in combat. But the most remarkable story of the 761st's early combat belonged to Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers. On November 16th, Rivers was leading a company's advance toward Giebling when his Sherman struck a mine at a railroad crossing. The explosion tore through the tank's belly armor and sent shrapnel ripping through the crew compartment. Rivers took the worst of it. Metal fragments slashed his leg from knee to thigh, cutting down to the bone. The wound was catastrophic, requiring immediate evacuation. Captain David Williams, the company commander, reached Rivers' position with a medic. They carried morphine to dull the pain before evacuation. Williams later recalled the conversation. "Ruben, you are going back. You have got $1 million wound. This is your ticket home." Rivers refused. He would not accept morphine because he said it would cloud his judgment. He would not accept evacuation because his men needed him. The medics cleaned and dressed the wound, but Rivers could see German artillery observers marking the position. He climbed into another Sherman and took command. Through the night of November 16th, Rivers remained with A Company as they prepared to assault Gebling. By dawn on November 17th, his leg had swollen grotesquely. Infection was setting in. The wound was turning gangrenous. Every movement caused visible agony. Captain Williams again ordered evacuation. Rivers again refused. "Captain, you know better than that. This is going to be tough." Rivers led the assault into Guibling. His tank crew later reported that he directed their fire through gritted teeth, sweat pouring down, his face from pain and fever. The Germans defended Guibling fiercely. The 761st lost 3 tanks to anti-tank fire and 1 to mines just taking the town. Rivers' Sherman engaged enemy positions throughout the day, knocking out machine gun nests and suppressing German infantry. Through November 17th and 18th, Rivers continued commanding his tank. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The infection was spreading. Medical officers who examined him in the field were horrified that he was still fighting. By the morning of November 19th, Rivers was clearly dying. His leg was black with gangrene. Fever racked his body. But a company was ordered to advance toward Bourgaltroff, and Rivers refused to be left behind. At dawn, a company pushed out from Gebling. Almost immediately, they came under heavy anti-tank fire from concealed German positions. Captain Williams ordered his tanks to pull back to cover. Rivers radioed that he had located the enemy anti-tank guns. He and another Sherman moved forward to engage, covering the company's withdrawal. The German guns concentrated their fire on the 2 exposed American tanks. Armor-piercing rounds struck Rivers' Sherman repeatedly. 1 penetrated the turret. The tank exploded. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers died instantly. 2 other crew members were killed. The survivors were wounded. Rivers had fought for 3 days with a wound that should have killed him on day 1. His leadership and sacrifice had enabled A Company to capture 2 heavily defended towns and inflict significant casualties on German forces. For his actions from November 16th to 19th, Rivers would eventually receive the Medal of Honor, though not until January 1997, 53 years after his death. The 761st Tank Battalion continued fighting. There was no time to process grief. The war demanded constant forward motion. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the West. The Battle of the Bulge caught Allied forces by surprise, creating a dangerous salient in American lines and threatening to reach the port of Antwerp. The 761st was rushed north to help contain the German breakthrough. They were attached to the 87th Infantry Division and thrown into the fight for the Belgian town of Tilley. The movement north was chaotic. Allied forces were scrambling to respond to the surprise German offensive. Roads were clogged with retreating units, refugees, and supply columns. The 761st moved through this chaos, reaching their assembly area on January 6, 1945. They went into action immediately. The battle for Tillet would prove to be one of the fiercest engagements the Black Panthers fought. German SS Panzer troops defended the town with fanatical determination. These were elite units, experienced soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front and knew how to defend against armour. They had prepared Tillet carefully, positioning anti-tank guns to cover approach routes, mining roads, fortifying buildings. They were determined to hold. Winter weather added another layer of misery. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow accumulated to several feet in places. Visibility was often reduced to meters by blowing snow. The cold was brutal. Tank engines struggled to start. Mechanical systems froze. Ammunition had to be warmed before loading or it would jam. Crews wore every layer of clothing available, but still suffered from the cold. The Sherman's narrow tracks struggled for traction on frozen ground. Tanks slipped and slid on ice. Drivers fought to maintain control on slopes. The narrow tracks distributed the tank's 30-ton weight over less surface area than wider tracks would have, reducing grip on ice and snow. Movement that would have been simple in summer became treacherous in winter conditions. During the Tillet operation, the 761st encountered something new. Psychological warfare directed specifically at them as black soldiers. German radio broadcasts delivered by American-born propagandist Mildred Gillers, known as Axis Sally, jammed American communications channels. Good morning, Negro soldiers of the 761st. I am sorry that you will die today in Tillet. Our fight is not with the Negroes in America, and your fight is not with us. Your fellow Negroes are rioting in Cleveland. Your commander, Captain Williams, is leading you to death and destruction. He is white, and not one of you. Your battalion commander, Major George, is also white, and not one of you. Leave your tanks now, and return home to Cleveland, where you are needed, and you will not be killed. The broadcast was accompanied by music from Louis Armstrong, specifically the song, I Cannot Give You Anything But Love, Baby. The psychological operation was sophisticated, designed to exploit racial tensions, and convince black soldiers that they were fighting a white man's war. It failed completely. The men of the 761st understood exactly what they were fighting for, not just against Nazi Germany, but against the very racial ideology that Axis Sally's broadcast represented. Tank Commander Frank Cochrane's response, radioed to his company, became legendary. They have hit me 3 times, but I am still giving them hell. The 761st captured Tillet after days of brutal close-quarters fighting. German defenders were shocked when they surrendered and discovered that black soldiers had defeated them. Many Wehrmacht soldiers had internalized Nazi propaganda so completely that encountering skilled black tankers produced cognitive dissonance. How could an inferior race defeat superior German troops? German prisoners captured by the 761st often displayed visible confusion and fear. One prisoner at Tillet asked, "What are you doing here? This is a white man's war." The answer, obvious to everyone except true believers in racial theory, was that Nazi racial ideology was simply wrong. The fighting for Tillet reached its climax on January 9th, when Captain Charles Gates led 10 Shermans of C Company against a height near the town held by German tanks, anti-tank guns, and infantry. One tank, commanded by Sergeant Theodore Windsor, was knocked out near the beginning of the fight. But Windsor climbed out and entered the tank commanded by Sergeant William McBurney, the man who had wanted to be a pilot. McBurney's tank found a gap in the German defences and pushed deep behind enemy lines, wreaking havoc there until it too was knocked out. Windsor and McBurney, with their driver, made their way back on foot for 3 miles through the snow, finally reaching American lines. Gates's tank also was knocked out, but the captain continued the attack on foot, finding a radio man to keep in touch with his drivers. One of his tankers, Sergeant Frank Cochrane, shouted over the radio, "They have hit me 3 times, but I am still giving them hell." Another, Lieutenant Moses Dade, took command of a tank that had lost its turret but otherwise still functioned, driving it toward the enemy while firing the Hull machine gun. Gates lost almost all of his tanks in the process, but by evening the Black Panthers had captured Tillet, destroying an enemy tank and 3 anti-tank guns, and killing several dozen enemy soldiers. Gates later would receive a Silver Star for his conduct. Supporting the elements of the 87th Infantry Division with just 11 tanks, the battalion took control of the city from the 113th Panzer Brigade through 2 days of combat, losing 9 tanks in the process. Nazi propaganda about black soldiers being inferior was extensively documented and widespread. The regime had conducted propaganda campaigns depicting black people as subhuman since the 1920s, long before the war began. These campaigns served multiple purposes. They reinforced Nazi racial theories at home. They prepared German soldiers to view their enemies as inferior. They attempted to divide Allied forces by exploiting racial tensions. The regime had spent years building these beliefs. Hitler's Mein Kampf, written in 1925 and 1926, contained explicit references to contamination of the white race through contact with black people. The book argued that racial mixing would lead to the decline of civilization. These ideas were not fringe beliefs, but central Nazi doctrine taught in schools, preached in propaganda, enforced through law. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935, primarily known for targeting Jews, also applied to black people in Germany. People of African descent were classified as racially alien. They faced legal discrimination, social ostracism, and eventually violent persecution. Approximately 500 Afro-Germans, people with one or more African ancestors living in Germany, were forcibly sterilized under Nazi racial hygiene programs between 1937 and 1945. The goal was to prevent what Nazis called racial contamination. During the war, the German military distributed propaganda leaflets to black American soldiers in November 1944, attempting to convince them they were fighting for a nation that oppressed them. These leaflets, examples of which are preserved in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum collection, depicted scenes of lynching and discrimination in America. They asked black soldiers why they were fighting for a country that treated them as second-class citizens. The psychological operation was sophisticated but ultimately ineffective because it underestimated black soldiers' understanding of what they were fighting against. Nazi cartoons depicted black soldiers as primitives incapable of modern warfare. German propaganda magazines published illustrations showing black American troops as savage, subhuman figures who threatened civilization. These images drew on centuries of racist stereotypes amplified by Nazi ideology. Wehrmacht soldiers were exposed to this propaganda throughout their training and service. Many internalized it completely. The Black Horror on the Rhine propaganda campaign had portrayed African soldiers in the French army during World War I as savages who committed atrocities against German civilians. Though these accusations were largely fabricated, they were widely believed in Germany and formed part of the narrative German soldiers carried into World War II. Wehrmacht training materials reinforced these beliefs, preparing German soldiers to face what they were told would be inferior opponents. German military intelligence assessments of American forces consistently underestimated black units, predicting they would break under pressure and fight poorly. These assessments reflected ideological bias rather than objective analysis. When reality contradicted these predictions, many German soldiers experienced cognitive dissonance that began to crack their faith in Nazi ideology. The reality proved devastatingly different. The 761st continued operations through the winter of 1944 and into 1945. They fought in the Rhineland campaign, breaching the Siegfried Line in March 1945. This accomplishment was particularly significant. The Siegfried Line, known to Germans as the West Wall, was a series of fortifications along Germany's western border. It stretched for nearly 400 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland. The line consisted of more than 18,000 bunkers, tunnels, and tank traps. Concrete fortifications housed anti-tank guns and machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. Dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped concrete obstacles, blocked tank movement. Minefields covered approaches. The Germans had spent years building these defences and considered them virtually impenetrable. Breaking through required coordinated infantry tank assaults against prepared positions defended by experienced German troops who were now fighting for their homeland. The 761st participated in multiple assaults on Siegfried Line positions. Each attack required meticulous planning. Engineers cleared mines and demolished obstacles under covering fire from tanks. Infantry advanced in close coordination with armour, each supporting the other. Artillery suppressed German defensive positions, while tanks and infantry manoeuvred into assault positions. These were set-piece battles, deliberate attacks against prepared defences. They required patience, coordination, and courage. During the period from March 20th to 23rd, 1945, the 761st achieved one of its most impressive tactical victories. In this four-day operation, breaking through fortified Siegfried Line positions near Reisdorf, they inflicted approximately 4,000 enemy casualties, killed, wounded, and captured 3,210 prisoners. German units defending this sector included elements of various Wehrmacht formations, as well as Volkssturm militia. The breakthrough allowed Allied forces to advance deeper into Germany, collapsing German defensive lines and hastening the end of the war. This single operation demonstrated the full evolution of the battalion's combat effectiveness. The inexperienced unit that had entered combat in November had become a veteran formation capable of executing complex combined arms operations against determined opposition. Their success proved that skill, training, and leadership mattered more than race. The 761st performed this mission repeatedly. Their tactics evolved with experience. They learned to suppress German anti-tank guns with coordinated fire. They developed techniques for clearing towns and fortifications. They became experts at combined arms warfare, integrating their armour with infantry, artillery, and air support. By late March 1945, the Black Panthers were among the most experienced armoured units in Patton's Third Army. German prisoners taken by the 761st were treated according to the Geneva Convention with professionalism and humanity. This behaviour, so at odds with what German soldiers had been told to expect from black soldiers, created another crack in Nazi ideology. If the Nazis had lied about black soldiers being murderous primitives, what else had they lied about? Some German prisoners later testified that capture by black American troops was the moment they began questioning everything the Third Reich had taught them. At the end of March 1945, the 761st crossed the Rhine River and pushed deep into Germany. The Rhine crossing was a major Allied operation. The river had served as Germany's last major natural defensive barrier in the west. Once across, Allied forces could advance into the industrial heart of Germany. The 761st crossed as part of a massive movement of men and equipment. Engineers had constructed pontoon bridges. Traffic control units managed the flow of vehicles. The crossing was orderly, professional, a demonstration of Allied logistical superiority. Over the following weeks, they participated in the encirclement of German forces in the Ruhr pocket. This massive operation trapped hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht and SS troops, effectively ending German capacity to defend Western Germany. The Ruhr was Germany's industrial heartland. Losing it meant losing the capacity to produce weapons, ammunition, and supplies. German forces attempted to break out of the encirclement. They failed. Allied forces tightened the noose methodically. The 761st's role was to maintain pressure on retreating German forces, preventing them from establishing new defensive lines. They conducted pursuit operations, moving rapidly to keep enemy units off balance. They engaged in meeting engagements with German forces attempting to withdraw. They captured towns whose defenders had not yet received orders to retreat. The pace was exhausting but exhilarating. After months of slow, grinding combat against prepared defences, they were now pursuing a broken enemy. They captured dozens of towns whose names blur together in after-action reports. Small German villages, farming communities, industrial suburbs. Each had to be cleared. Each might contain defenders. Tank crews remained alert despite fatigue, scanning for threats, ready to engage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.